Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Make sure that you're following and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. We're kicking off a new year here, and I have a great guest coming on. Miranda Devine, New York Post, Laptop from Hell author, phenomenal book that really got the ball rolling on everything. And I'm going to actually hit Miranda with probably the best question of the night. Are you trying to kill Hunter Biden? Because Hunter Biden came out and he said it, you know, people are hoping that he relapse. If they speak about him and the corruption of the Biden family, it's because they want him to relapse and die to hurt Joe Biden. So are you trying to kill Hunter Biden?
No, I'm not, and neither is anybody, and that is the most pathetic excuse I've ever heard, and it's typical of that sort of cynical, emotional blackmail that he uses, and we've seen him use on his family, and a lot of addicts use it, and a lot of really unhinged people use it. And it's just about, I can do whatever I like, and if you remonstrate with me, I'm going to threaten you by dying, by killing myself, and therefore it's your fault. Well, no, I'm sorry, it's your fault. It's not our fault. And he is a survivor. There is just no way. And the other thing he said about that was that they're trying to destroy, because if he dies, then Joe Biden won't be able to cope losing his last surviving son, as Joe Biden always calls Hunter, my surviving son, just to remind everybody. And then, you know, that'll destroy Joe's presidency. That is not what people are doing. All we're doing is trying to find the role that Joe Biden had in his son and his brother's influence peddling operation overseas. And we need to know, because Joe Biden as vice president was point man for all these corrupt countries and our adversaries like China. And his family extracted millions of dollars from them using his power and influence in those areas. And of course, those were bribes to Joe Biden, because you don't bribe the principal. Everyone in the world knows that. China knows that. Russia knows that. You don't bribe the official. You bribe their family members. So, I mean, I don't think we even need to go so far as to find direct payments. But, you know, James Comer has found some direct payments which are dressed up as loans. So let's see where that goes.
Well, it's funny because I keep on hearing, they were just simply loan. Like Joe Biden's loaning out all this money to all these different people and then getting all this money back. And it's like, I don't know anyone who just regularly hands out loans like this, especially when they're in the influence peddling scheme, because the only reason you do it is for money laundering purposes. You declare it as a loan so that when the money's coming in, it doesn't get questioned. But it's also interesting, the fact that if we do look at all the countries that are giving the Bidens money, it's not like we're talking about Britain and France and Australia and Canada. We're talking about some of the most nefarious countries in the entire world, countries that are authoritarian, to say the least, and countries that we routinely criticize out loud on the world stage. So is it normal to receive all this money from all these authoritarian countries and then run it through, 19, 20 different shell companies and then give out loans and get money back in loans and pay off, 9 or 10 family members are we up to at this point? You know, is that normal? Have you ever seen that in your reporting throughout the history of your reports? Have you ever seen that level of money changing hands and it's all above board?
Of course not. I mean, it's the classic hallmarks of, mafia, money laundering, drug cartels. This is how they manage to hide their money. And this is just a scheme that's so recognizable to, for instance, the IRS investigators, whistleblowers now. they just looked at what Hunter Biden and Jim Biden were doing, and it was just a classic money laundering operation. And so that's really what caught their eye. And once they started pulling on the strings, of course, it led to Joe Biden. And that's where the obstruction happened. They were not allowed to look at Joe Biden because, of course, at the top of this scheme, the product that they're selling is Joe Biden. And Joe Biden is not only aware of what they're doing, he's actively involved. He's the one who's making introductions for Hunter. He's the one who's inviting Hunter's business partners on Air Force Two to his vice presidential residence. He's the one who's offering himself up to go to dinners at Cafe Milano with Hunter's business partners from Ukraine and Russia and Kazakhstan. He's also appearing on speakerphone with Hunter. Now, Devon Archer said in his testimony, up to 20 times, but I've talked to others about this and who were present, and it's more than 20 times. I think Devon was being modest when he said that. It was practically every time that Hunter was closing a deal or, meeting with benefactors or trying to curry favor with some of these people giving him money and trying to demonstrate that he had pull, that he wasn't just some sad, washed up junkie, that he was a guy with instant access to the second most powerful man in the world.
But Joe Biden was just saying hello when he called in.
Yeah, it was just about the weather. But that misses the point as well. That's, everybody knows this. I mean, it's just so disingenuous of the so-called, elite media, the New York Times and Washington Post and the rest of them, to feign ignorance and naivety about this. Of course, the principal does not talk about the nitty-gritty of the deals. Jeff Bezos wouldn't do that. The head of JP Morgan wouldn't do that. That's what you've got your underlings doing. You don't sully your hands with that kind of detail. You're just there to glad hand and be, the big kahuna and be wheeled out by your son and your brother to show that you're there and you're blessing the operation, but don't talk to him about details. And in fact, when Tony Bobulinski first met with Joe Biden in, I think it was 2017 at the Beverly Hills Hilton, he first had a drink and a bite to eat with Hunter and Uncle Jim Biden. And they said to him, look, Joe's coming and he's going to meet you, but just keep everything at a high level. And I said to Tony Bobulinski, what does that mean, a high level? And he says, it means you don't talk about details. You just talk in vague generalities. And that is the reason for that was explained to Tony Bobulinski the next day by Jim Biden when they met separately. And Tony Bobulinski said, aren't you worried about Joe Biden getting rumbled, being involved with, your businesses? And because, he may run for president again. And Jim Biden said, tapped his nose and he said, plausible deniability. And, plausible deniability is what, is used as sort of a term of art, the CIA, I think, coined for making sure that the president isn't implicated in any atrocities performed by his government by just making sure that it's on a need-to-know basis. He only knows as much as he needs to know so that if he's ever questioned about it, he can honestly say he doesn't know anything about, I don't know anything about my son's business dealings.
Yeah, he didn't broker any of the deals. That's we all know that, but the evidence is the evidence. And the fact that he said that he never, ever met with or spoke with any of Hunter Biden's business associates, well, that lie's been blown out of the water, that's for sure. But how do you respond to people? Because I constantly get this, and then I'm like, oh, no, now I got to go through this whole long litany.
Yeah.
How do you respond to people when they say, well, there's still no evidence. Despite everything that we know, there's still no evidence of any type of wrongdoing or criminality that took place.
That's just gaslighting. That's just classic from Abby Lowell and all these slick-tongued lawyers and Democratic politicians. they know there's just overwhelming evidence. James Comer brings it out all the time. Bank records, text messages, photographs, documents, witness testimony. Joe Biden is involved in this scheme, and it's there are FARA violations, there's money laundering, there's bribery, there's corruption. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a policeman, so it's really kind of a pity that this whole case against Joe Biden is being played out in Congress when it really should have been played out in the Department of Justice where it belonged. But the sort of dozens of warnings and tip-offs that came into the DOJ over, the past sort of 5 or 6 years. In fact, during the vice presidency, during Joe Biden's vice presidency, they seem to all get buried, fall on deaf ears, get ignored. Even under Bill Barr, he funneled everything through to Delaware, which is incredibly curious because Delaware is the one state in the country where Joe Biden is king. And he's owned that state. He's ruled that state. People are frightened of him since he was 30 years old, since he first became a senator. And Hunter Biden boasted when he was having some argument trying to shake down his Chinese business partners. He warned them, I'll sue you in the Delaware courts. And, my father and I know every single judge on that court. So good luck to you, sort of thing. They know that they have complete impunity, and the police in Delaware know it too. I mean, they've had to cover up for various assorted, extended Biden family members when they're drunk driving, when they crash their cars, all sorts of malfeasance that goes on gets buried. We don't hear about it. David Weiss, who's the U.S. attorney in Delaware, he's been there for a long time. The Biden lawyers, the Biden camp, the White House keeps on saying, oh, he's a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney, which is so disingenuous because, he was sort of a deputy or an acting U.S. attorney for many years. And in fact, I think it was like maybe 15 years ago, a long time ago, that there was the famous Tigani case, Chris Tigani case of election, violations, election finance violations by a donor to the Joe Biden campaign that was set up by Joe, by his 2 sons, and by his campaign manager. Chris Tigani ends up going to jail for bundling for several years and fined a huge amount of money. He had to wear a wire, but David Weiss, who was running that little operation, never got him to go after the Biden campaign, whereas the entire crime was about the Biden campaign. Instead, he was wearing a wire for all sorts of penny ante local, officials. And the only person who went to jail was Chris Tigani. So there was a sort of a limited hangout, a protection racket again. So why would we think that anything would be different when you fast forward to 2018 and it's about Hunter Biden? And in fact, IRS investigator Joseph Ziegler had a very spirited argument with the DOJ tax people about the venue. He said this should not be in Delaware because the venue for the charges is going to be Washington, D.C., because that was where Hunter lived in this particular period. And he was overruled. And why? I mean, none of the offences occurred in Delaware. So I still don't understand why Bill Barr funneled everything through to Delaware where it died.
Well, I would say Delaware, Washington, D.C., it's kind of the same jury pools. 94% of Washington, D.C. residents did support Joe Biden. But when we look at it, Weiss is a big problem for me. I mean, here you have someone that, again, he tries to parse words, stating that he didn't have authority. Then he says, well, he did have authority if he asked the attorney general to form the special counsel and everything. But he hits Hunter Biden with 9 new tax violations. They're not necessarily the most serious of charges. Yeah, the biggest thing, the most obvious thing, and this is where we see the double standards, is there are no FARA violations, no FARA charges. Hunter Biden never registered as a foreign agent, even though he was receiving all this money from foreign governments. Meanwhile, you have Paul Manafort. How many years did he serve? And a lot of it in solitary confinement. And so, what do you think is Weiss's deal? Did him and the older brother, the attorney general of Delaware at the time, did they have a strong relationship together?
No, there's no evidence of a strong relationship there at all. But I think, I don't know if, I mean, you may know something that I don't, but that's I'm not aware of that. There was a relationship that Beau Biden had with various other people, Joe Biden donors and so on, but I'm not aware of anything with David Weiss. But there's so many obstructions that happened with that investigation that we've been told about by the two IRS whistleblowers, Ziegler and Gary Shapley. And that included the fact that David Weiss let the statute of limitations run out on the 2014 and 2015 years, which were, probably the most serious charges potential, because that was the Ukraine era. That was when Hunter was getting paid $83,000 a month by Burisma. He still hasn't paid the tax on
But
some of that.
according to the president, Hunter Biden started at Burisma before he was tasked with going over there, even though the records don't drive.
Complete lie. It was a month after Joe was formally appointed as the point man by Obama that Hunter joined the board of Burisma. More than a month. I think it was like 6 weeks. And Joe Biden had been involved before that, because during the Maiden Revolution, he was on the phone stirring up trouble supposedly helping and obviously doing the usual Joe Biden thing of just making even a worse mess of a messy situation. And so, no, that's not true. I mean, he lies. So many lies, that you just picked up one. Abby Lowell, who's Hunter Biden's lawyer, has been lying through his teeth ever since the indictment came out. He's pretending that the indictment, which carries a 17-year penalty, is just about Hunter Biden while the poor thing was a drug addict, failing, being late with his returns. No, I'm sorry, that's not what it is. It's not misdemeanors. These are felonies for actually filing fraudulent returns, which he filed and created and met with accountants in 2020 when he was supposedly sober, when Kevin Morris, the Hollywood very wealthy lawyer, had been enlisted to fix his messes and bail him out and pay off $2.8 million in his taxes, pay off his debts, pay for his incredibly lavish lifestyle. Like, if Hunter Biden's broke and has no visible source of income, he's not working, unlike other people who are broke and go and get a job as an Uber driver or something. Hunter Biden just lounges around, does nothing, and he's living in at one point a $25,000 a month, now then a $20,000 a month house in Malibu. And Kevin Morris is footing the bill for that, and whatever else costs are involved with maintaining, a layabout, luxurious, jet-set lifestyle. And that doesn't even include the freeloading with daddy off the taxpayer when he goes and lives at the White House and travels around on Air Force One. And we're told to feel sorry for him because he somehow was a drug addict and was late with his taxes. And that's not the case at all. This was, or looks like, from what the indictment says, a deliberate or willful is the legal term, a willful decision to defraud the American taxpayer effectively. And
well, when you're writing off $10,000 in a sex club as a business expense,
sex club membership,
crazy.
And his daughter's $100,000, I think it was $100,000 in Columbia University fees, or numerous other things. His crack benders that he used to have at Chateau Marmont in Hollywood, that I think one of them was like $40,000 or $30,000 one stint. That was again written off. Just ridiculous. And all of us fill out our tax returns every year, and we're always very careful about making sure that you only put in legitimate business expenses, and that is sort of the contract that we have with the IRS, with our fellow citizens, our fellow taxpayers, that you're just honest with your taxes. And if you're not, you're going to get into a lot of trouble. And here is a guy who just seems to have complete impunity. First of all, he doesn't think he should pay his taxes. And then when finally it is brought home to him by Kevin Morris and this army of people that the campaign got involved because they were worried that Hunter's personal life was such a mess that it was going to impact on Joe's campaign, because he had two women, his ex-wife and the mother of his love child, his baby mama, London Roberts. Both were threatening him with contempt of court if he didn't produce these tax returns that he hadn't finished. So that was why that was all happening. But this is a limited hangout, because people go, oh, well, a tax, big deal. Like, okay, he made mistakes on his tax returns. That's not a hanging offense. And, the poor guy had a messy life. But that's just the bare minimum. And you can see from the IRS whistleblowers' testimony, and they've now testified a couple of times. They've produced so many documents, It tells a very deep and detailed story about what was really going on and the myriad crimes that could have been pursued, and all those avenues were stopped. I mean, for instance, the investigators were blocked from getting a search warrant for a cottage on Joe Biden's estate in Delaware, which Hunter had been living in. When they wanted to get a search warrant for a storage unit that Hunter had, they were told that the Hunter's lawyers were tipped off, so there was no point getting it. When they had to wait until after the 2020 election to actually interview Hunter, but they organised in December of 2020, that's what they do. And lo and behold, Joe Biden's transition campaigns gets tipped off by FBI headquarters that the next morning Hunter's going to have a knock on the door, and these IRS and FBI people are going to want to talk to him. So, of course, the tip-off means Hunter doesn't talk to them. They never get an interview. So many obstructions, slow walking. For instance, that famous WhatsApp message when Hunter Biden's at his father's place in Delaware, and he sends the WhatsApp to one of his Chinese business associates at CEFC, and he says, basically, I'm sitting here with my father, and if you don't fulfill the commitments, i.e. give me the $5 million that you owe me, then my father and I and all the people we know are going to make your life a misery, and you have no idea what hell will be rained upon you. So just very menacing tones. And shortly after that WhatsApp, $5 million did pop into his bank account, and another $1 million as well. So that was a WhatsApp message that Joseph Ziegler and the FBI guys got from a surveillance warrant on Hunter Biden's iCloud. And when Joe Ziegler saw that, he mentioned it in their regular prosecution meeting with the prosecutors in Delaware, and Leslie Wolf, who seemed to be the primary US attorney there who was running interference for Joe Biden, she sort of scoffed as if, so what about that WhatsApp message? And, you don't even know if Joe Biden was there. It's completely irrelevant. And Joe Ziegler said, well, yeah, but we can easily find out if he was there, because all we have to do is geolocate his phone. And she just fixed him with a beady glare and said, well, let's think about it. And of course, it never happened. So these are the things. They weren't allowed to talk about Joe Biden. They weren't allowed to ask witnesses about the big guy, the identity of the big guy. Everything that touched Joe Biden was off limits.
I think that's what concerns me most, because Joe Biden's corruption, Hunter Biden's corruption, it's wrong, and they certainly need to be held accountable. But what's concerning me more is the bureaucracy. Let's face it, Joe Biden, and I'm not trying to be mean, but he's not going to be here that much longer. It's the corruption within the bureaucracy that's the real concern. And I want to talk to you about that when we get back from this quick break. So everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. When things go sideways, you want to be prepared. Protect you and your family. And people are concerned. They might have to go for a long time without food, electricity. That's why I want to introduce you to 4patriots.com. Get preparedness products you could use now, and that could save your life later. My favorite is 4Patriots' new solar generator, the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. It uses the endless free power of the sun to power your lights, your TV, medical equipment, even run your fridge. Plus, it's expandable and comes with a free solar panel. Or you can pick up one of 4Patriots' best-selling survival food kits. Delicious tasting and designed to last for 25 years. They even have kits with real meat. And if the power's out, no worries. Just boil water over fire, simmer, and serve. You're going to enjoy a hot meal and stay safe in a crisis. More smart people than ever are finding 4Patriots. Over 2 million customers trust them, and you might have even seen them on TV. I had the folks at 4Patriots set up a special page for you at 4patriots.com/PAS so that listeners of this podcast can see this week's discounts and deals before they go away. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS, but you gotta hurry because the deals don't last long. So save more money, get peace of mind, and protect you and your family. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS. Welcome back, everyone. And Miranda, so the reality is that under the Obama White House, there were red flags at the White House. There were concerns about Joe Biden's activities and his son Hunter's activities and the conflict of interest that existed there. There were concerns in the FBI. There were numerous reports of red flags that were going on when it comes to Hunter Biden's activities. You had Secret Service that went out to clean up Hunter Biden's gun mess. You had the FBI that was tracking down Ashley Biden's diary. And I never heard of the FBI actually going on a chase to get someone's diary. I mean, that, if anything, would be a local police force matter. It wouldn't be a federal law enforcement matter. It's like President Biden's own secret police force. Then you have the DOJ that's been running interference on all the investigations. And all this reveals the thorough corruption within the government, within the bureaucracy, where they try and put a shield around Joe Biden while at the same time they're actually targeting his political opponent. I mean, it really is stunning if you look at everything that's taking place today. We're supposed to sit here and pretend that this is all normal. That's what they want us to think. So what do you think about the firewall that's been placed around Joe Biden and the protection of his family? And why do you think that they continue to protect this family?
Yeah, you're spot on. I think that the story of the cover-up is bigger even than the story of the corruption, which is sort of Washington-wide and needs to be cleaned up. But and I think it is important that the American public and history records what Joe Biden's true nature was and how corrupt he is. But the underlying corruption in the institutions, especially the security apparatus, the FBI, the CIA, the DOJ, is deeply, deeply worrying. And I haven't really figured out the true root of it. I mean, in part, protecting Joe Biden seemed to be kind of an all of government exercise. And in part, I think it's a way of covering their own backsides, because once they started covering for him, say, before the 2020 election, I mean, they may have been motivated simply by, being anti-Trumpers, never Trumpers, and thinking that Trump's an existential threat. So, whatever it takes to make sure he goes, so we will protect Joe Biden. There's that aspect. But I think it goes even deeper than that. I think, I feel like particularly around the Ukraine grift, the firing of the prosecutor, there's been a lot of lies and a lot of backfilling and a lot of, how do I describe it? A very well orchestrated, well organized cover-up. And with sort of identical talking points to the media, which the media has then regurgitated with anonymous sources saying that the Europeans, that the IMF, they all say the same thing, that everybody wanted Viktor Shokin out because Viktor Shokin was corrupt.
And with the EU, that was a lie, right? Because the EU issued a report in December before Shokin was fired, stating that he was cooperating, that he was actually trying to clean up some of the corruption.
Yeah, I mean that he was doing a good job of that. That he was the first. Remember, he was there such a short time, and in that short time, there are, objective measurements of how many corruption cases that he started, that he kept going, compared to his predecessors, and he was being praised by everyone from John Kerry to Victoria Nuland, the EU, I think it was the IMF, or no, it was the EU. It's some branch of the EU had just awarded Ukraine some sort of open visa to Europe because they'd met all these benchmarks for corruption busting, and much of that was due to Shokin, and so he was sort of the golden boy, and then suddenly when it right at the time that Burisma, which was paying Hunter all this money, was under the gun and being, the investigation into this very corrupt energy company was moving forward aggressively under Shokin. And then you see in the emails to Hunter Biden and other messages, and to Devon Archer, who were on the board of Burisma, that Burisma was very concerned about this, and they were putting pressure on them to do something with their contacts in Washington, and they wanted important people coming to Ukraine and singing the praises of the owner of Burisma, Zlochevsky, and do something about the legal cases against us. It was explicit, and so it was exactly in that time frame that Joe Biden goes to Ukraine in December of 2015, and that's when he first brings up to Poroshenko that Shokin has to go. And we know that because Poroshenko told Shokin, and Shokin has told me and other people that Poroshenko said to him, Joe Biden doesn't like you. Joe Biden's going to come and he's going to show me documents proving your corruption. Joe Biden never did that because there were no documents. And that's what Shokin has said. People have badmouthed him in America surrounding Biden, and Biden himself saying he's corrupt. But no one's ever produced a shred of evidence to say that he is corrupt. There's absolutely nothing. And in fact, what you've had is a deliberate and dishonest conflating, including, I believe, by Jeffrey Pyatt, who was the ambassador at that time, a conflating of his predecessors presiding over the destruction of a serious fraud squad and FBI joint investigation into Zlochevsky, the owner of Burisma. There was $24 million frozen in a London bank account, and that freeze and the serious fraud squad's case was mysteriously thrown out because there was a letter from the prosecutor's office in Kiev to the British court saying, oh, no, this guy's Zlochevsky, we've got nothing, no crimes against him. So he was sort of exonerated and got his 24 million back. And that was huge egg on the face for the FBI. And the serious fraud squad was absolutely furious because the Americans were supposed to be in charge in Ukraine, and they'd allowed this dishonest letter to be written. And Shokin was brought in after that because the prosecutor at the time, the general, the prosecutor general, which is the equivalent of the attorney general here, was fired. And Shokin was brought out of retirement, a clean skin, a prosecutor who was very famous and popular in Ukraine because he'd been so fearless in fighting corruption, because he'd prosecuted some very high-profile cases, and he was sort of like the people's champion, and that's how he prided himself. So Poroshenko thought, well, I'll fix the image problem that the Prosecutor General's office has got at the moment because of this disastrous bribery scandal, and I'll bring in Viktor Shokin. And so Viktor Shokin has a lot to lose by being called corrupt, and that's why he still to this day remains very sore and very in search of vindication and some sort of an apology. And look, I mean, the country is at war now, and he's living outside Kiev and he has missiles falling in his backyard. So I guess he's got more important things to worry about. But it's a tragedy.
True.
And I've interviewed people in the EU, including, well, I won't say who because I haven't written the story yet, but people who were quoted, not many were quoted in the Washington Post, et cetera, saying that Shokin was corrupt and that Joe Biden was just doing, what the Europeans wanted when he got him fired. But most of these people were anonymous, but there were a couple who were named on the record, and I've talked to them, and they deny that they were talking about Shokin. They said, we never said anything about Shokin. And one of them says, all I was worried about was it had taken the Ukrainians, the prosecutors, so long to claw back money from the previous regime, the kleptocrats who were thrown out after the Maidan Revolution and were in exile in Russia and took with them billions of dollars. They cleaned out the treasury. And so that money was supposed to be clawed back by international investigations and by the Ukrainian prosecutors themselves. And they had a lot of difficulty doing it. And I am going to say that a lot of the difficulty was caused by American obstruction. Certain oligarchs who were being protected, and the firing of a very effective prosecutor in Victor Shokin, and then the guy who replaced Victor Shokin was a politician. He knew nothing. He wasn't a lawyer even, and Joe Biden described him as very solid guy. He wasn't a solid guy at all. He was a complete disaster. And so any efforts that the Ukrainians were trying under Shokin to get that money back from the oligarchs who'd skipped off were seriously stymied. And I will say that I think they got a certain amount of money. I think it was like 150 million, or anyway, it was a lot of money, but not nowhere near as a drop in the bucket to what had been stolen. And that was repatriated with Shokin's help. I mean, he'd been fired, but the anti-corruption activist who was the primary instigator of that basically praises Shokin and says that without him, it never would have happened.
Well, we're living in the post-truth era right now. The truth doesn't matter. And if you go against certain narratives, you're going to have your character assassinated. It's clear. We see this day in, day out. We see the media doesn't really care about the truth anymore, because what we're witnessing is a bureaucratic takeover, right? The bureaucracy is the all-powerful being. And I'm starting to think that the bureaucracy is much more powerful than the president of the United States, because I get to see them try and take down a former president while he was a president with a fake Russian collusion investigation and protect the current president. And it's because that's their preference. So they get to pick and choose. But do you think that there's going to come a point where the dam begins to break? I mean, we see the censorship apparatus that's been built out. That's being exposed. The Biden corruption is being exposed. The abuses of power, the FBI targeting parents and traditional Catholics and MAGA supporters, that's being exposed. So it's all coming out. At what point does the rest of the media have no choice but to actually cover it? And if they do focus on the Biden administration, on Biden corruption, do you think it's only because the current president served his purpose and now they could get rid of him because he's a liability? Or do you think one day the media is going to be forced to actually report on the corruption, not just of the Biden family, but the entire bureaucracy?
I just think we're living in a completely different environment where the media outfits, the newspapers that used to practice journalism, are now really just propaganda outfits that serve only to protect and prop up the regime. And I would also go so far as to say that at least one of them, but maybe more, is really just a CIA front. All it does is there are active CIA.
Can you tell us which one that is? I think I know, but
yeah, I mean, look, I think the Washington Post, for instance, if you just it seems like a crazy conspiracy theory, but if you just keep it in mind and read what they do, it's unmistakable. And
I just want to tell the audience, for those that think that it's a crazy conspiracy theory, this is the same CIA in 2014 that was spying on sitting members of the United States Senate Intelligence Committee, literally collecting their data, their electronic communications, their emails, their text messages. And when the Senate found out, they feigned their outrage, but not a single person was held accountable. Nobody was punished. Nobody was arrested or went to jail, even though you had the CIA spying on duly elected members of the United States Senate. So if they could spy on members of the Senate and get away with it, yes, they could work in newsrooms too and force news.
Yeah. And I mean, talk about lack of accountability. James Clapper and John Brennan lied to Congress, got away with it. You know, you said, well, you know, everything's being exposed and something will have to change. I don't think so, because, you know, the Russia collusion hoax has been exposed, but nothing has come of it. And I think that there would be, you know, 40% of the country who still believes it, still believes the Steele dossier and, you know, all the other garbage about Donald Trump, that Donald Trump was somehow a Russian agent. I think people still believe that, because what did Winston Churchill said? A lie is halfway around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. And you know, with social media, people's attention span is so tiny now, and there's so many kind of sources of information, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. But it just means everyone has, you know, it's like that woman Gay, who's the dean of Harvard, and when she's testifying and she talks about my truth. I mean, when the dean of Harvard is talking about my truth, and everyone's got their own truth, there's like 150 million versions of the truth in this country. And so, you know, people don't trust.
Because people are morons and they buy into it. The second, and a student of mine, they brought up this idea of my truth, and I just stayed outright. I'm just like, this whole concept of my truth is the most imbecilic thing I've ever heard, because there is no such thing as my truth or your truth. There's truth. Whether we want to accept it or not, that's different, but there's truth. It exists. We don't have to accept it, but it exists. Yes,
that's right. And look, I think the only way anything changes is if you have power. And so you see just the tiny amount of power that the voters gave the Republicans, it's, you know, in the midterm, so that they could then take control of the House. You see what a difference that has made. I mean, not as much as it should have, but in terms of just the Hunter Biden investigation, how much further we've come in, 9 months, 10 months, and how much has been exposed, and how, you know, Joe Biden, the story now from the White House has gone from, I know nothing about my son Hunter's overseas business dealings, to now, oh, the president was not in business with his son, you know.
Well, I just want to interrupt this because I find it amazing. Now, I do think that the power is important. You need to get in power in order to make changes. It's like when people complain about election fraud and the election laws, I say, well, you're not going to fix the election system until you get into power. So you got to figure that out first. But when we look at the idea of power, I mean, the Republicans, not that I have that much faith in them, but it really is stark. Like George Santos, scummy guy. I'm not defending him. I'm not defending anything he did. The lies he told were truly amazing. And the fact that the opposition research didn't uncover it, or the media didn't know about it, that's a bunch of nonsense. They had to have. I'm sorry. But what really annoys me is what George Santos did. He defrauded his voters and he disrespected his voters and his constituency, but it didn't do harm to anyone realistically. Where you have Bob Menendez getting gold bars from Egypt, you $500,000 in cash in his house. You have the entire Biden family. You have Mayor Adams now being questioned about money coming in from Turkey. Like these are real serious things, and yet everyone, oh my God, George Santos, he's horrible. Yeah, he is horrible, but they actually did harm. Like Bob Menendez serving as a foreign agent actually harmed the United States and had severe repercussions. And maybe it's a cultural shift. And that's what I want to talk to you when we get back from this quick break. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So Miranda, do you think it is a cultural thing where we don't think critically anymore, that everyone just simply operates on emotion? We just have a dumbed down education system that doesn't teach people how to think, instead it teaches them what to think?
Yes, I do. But in the George Santos case, I think it's something even deeper, which is that Republicans are still clinging, or many of them are still clinging to this idea that they're the morally superior party, that they're, lily white, and that, the Democrats might have scumbags, that the Democratic president might be the biggest liar on the face of the planet. I mean, today he said that Ronald Reagan offered to send his helicopter to take him to hospital one time. Everything that comes out of his mouth, he said he played lacrosse. I mean, these are trivial lies compared to the big lies he tells, but you can tell a lot about the sort of fantasy fabulism that comes out of his mouth, which is exactly like George Santos, big noting himself, pretending to do this, that, and the other. The other thing they share is, being liking to use other people's money to dress up in all sorts of fancy clothes. But the thing that the Republicans did...
Well, progressives are good at spending other people's money.
Yes, and George Santos was too. But, it's the moral vanity of these Republicans that allowed them to be suckered in to this whole media drumbeat about George Santos and how appalling he was. And, they just got sucked in. They have a tiny majority and they just reduced it by one. So, and then, of course, because there was the big fight over the speaker.
Now McCarthy's
leaving, and then his friend is leaving because he got some gig at a university in Youngstown, Ohio. And the Republicans just aren't strategic. I imagine, and no one's told me this, but I bet you that some clever group of Democrat strategists has got a spreadsheet out, and they're looking at every single slim seat Republican, and they're figuring out what can we bribe them with, what can we blackmail them with, both to get them out of office so that they can take the seat and so that the numbers, so that Republicans lose control of the House, but also in terms of votes. So it'll be very interesting with the Republicans voting on the impeachment inquiry. It should be unanimous. I mean, there is just no question that there is grounds to have at the very least an inquiry. But if any Republican votes no on that, you have to look very closely at that person. And you would also hope that...
you don't even have to bring it to the impeachment inquiry. I mean, the fact that they feign more outrage towards a George Santos than they do of an FBI abusing its power against the American people and targeting parents and traditional Catholics, that should tell everyone what they need to know.
About a border that's wide open with, 8 million, 10 million people, illegal aliens streaming across it, and New York just being chock-a-block. I mean, migrants are sleeping on the street in the freezing cold now. And our mayor is telling us, I went to Washington, they turned me down, so expect things are going to get worse. They're cutting the NYPD.
And his investigations will build up potentially.
Yeah. And I mean, crime is going up because the cops are saying they're catching illegal aliens, shoplifting, Macy's, shoplifting over in Brooklyn or somewhere. And then there are murders, there are rapes. The crime is increasing thanks to this influx of illegal aliens. And the mayor's Eric Adams' plan is to cut the budget, including the NYPD's budget. That
All
is
city
insane.
budgets across the board. Every department agency has to be cut to fund this. But we're living in an insane time, and that's what it shows. I don't think I've ever seen a period of civilization where it's not just the United States. We're watching Western civilization commit suicide through self-inflicted wounds.
And why is that? Is it because it's just the natural end of empire? You look back at the Roman Empire and it seems inevitable now, their downfall, their decadence, and their hubris. And is that just inevitable, or is it, is it going to be China's century? If you just look at, I guess, the character of a people, and you just look at the drug addiction, you just look at the homeless people. You look at San Francisco that got cleaned out before that APEC leaders meeting, before
3 days
President Xi came in. Yeah. And the before and the after. I mean, I just wonder what
and
the
they'll
Chinese...
still vote for Gavin Newsom.
Yes. And what do the Chinese think when I'm sure those videos are played on rerun on TikTok in China and Russia and everywhere that hates America? They just must look at America and think that it's obvious that that is the sign of a decaying civilization that will be over soon.
Deng Xiaoping, bide your time. That's what he said. Bide your time, hide your strength. And that's the thing. I think you're right. I think it is, you hit a wall as a society. I think there's too many with overinflated sense of egos that exist out there where they think they're smarter than everyone else. And yet they don't realize the damage they're doing. And then I think there's the more nefarious crew that actually wants to see the chaos. They want to see when things get bad enough, people turn to government and hand the government even more power. And so you have the nefarious aspect to this too. So it depends on the person.
And the George Soros, apparently, he's a chaos merchant. He wants to create chaos because out of chaos comes huge social change. I don't know quite what plan is for the ultimate outcome of that social change. I mean, we've lived through that in the 20th century and it wasn't great.
And the social change we're seeing now isn't really all that great. I really don't want, the gender ideology being pushed. But it all comes down to destroy your country's culture, you destroy that country. And for America, it's even worse than it because it's not like we have a common culture. Like you go to Britain, they got 2,000 years of history together. They got shared language, shared history, shared traditions. You go to France, Italy, Saudi Arabia, thousands of years of recorded history. We don't have that. We only have 250 years just about. And so what really links us together in America? Now, if we could break America down into the tribal society through DEI, well, that's where you turn us into a country that's going to become a failed state.
But look, I think on an optimistic note that America is the only country in the West that has the seeds of victory in it to overcome this disaster that we find ourselves in. And you just see in America's, relatively short history, how it's managed to pull itself out of disaster and rebuild. And so I think that's in the DNA of America is triumph over adversity. And I think that's why this election, I feel like we always say, this election is the most important, but I do think 2024 is crucial because, God forbid that Biden win again. I think, probably, people tell me that it will be Biden-Harris, regardless. There are all sorts of rumors that they'll swap out.
It's not going to be him. It's going to be Hillary Clinton. You heard it here first. It'll be Hillary
or Michelle
Clinton.
Obama. Yeah.
No, Michelle Obama doesn't want any part of it.
Yeah.
But you need someone that has 100% name recognition, that could raise tons of money, and that has a campaign apparatus built in. Hillary Clinton never dismantled it. So I just have this feeling. That's why you're seeing her so much. She's the one. She's helping Biden's campaign. And I'm just sitting there thinking, someone should tell Joe, just keep an eye on her. Because when she comes in with the pillow, she might be the one that puts, takes that last breath from him.
But she's quite repulsive to voters. So I would think that if it were a choice between Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, they'd stick with Joe. And, they can prop him up. They just have to prop him up for another year. And I don't think he's actually as addled in the brain as people make out. Obviously he slipped several cogs and he's got physical problems, but I've talked to people who have been in meetings with him, and when he's focused and when I guess the drugs have kicked in, he's quite compass and quite lucid and can run an agenda and doesn't have to read off notes and is quite competent. And so I think he's able to pull that off every now and then. And you see, he always surprises. I know he's worse now than he was in 2020, but I just looked at those two debates that he had with Donald Trump during the campaign, and he actually did very well. At the time, I didn't think so because I just thought he's just so repellent and corrupt. How can anyone vote for him? But now looking back with a more sort of sanguine view, because he did win the election and has managed to hang on since then and do a lot of damage. He did what he needed to do, and he is a lifelong fake. So, but anyway, regardless, they've
And they're going to hide him in the 2024 campaign. All the focus is going to be on the Trump trials. So they're going to hide him.
Exactly. And that's why I think they're desperate to juice these polls and ensure that Donald Trump is the nominee. And I think that then, after he's been nominated, then will come, because at the moment it's sort of kid gloves, a bit of oh, he's a dictator, which doesn't really hurt him, and is so bogus anyway. It's such a projection considering that Joe Biden's the one who's acting like an authoritarian leader.
I tried getting Liz Cheney on the podcast.
Really?
Her people don't want her coming on.
Oh, that's hilarious. Wow, you should. She's so awful. What a fraud. Honestly.
Most of them, like I said, when you're more outraged, when you're screaming Trump's a dictator, but you're allowing the bureaucracy to violate our First Amendment rights, our Fourth Amendment rights, or Fifth Amendment rights, you can't talk to me about dictatorship anymore. And that's all them are frauds. That's
when
what
you're trying to lock up your political opponent on completely bogus charges. All 4 of these trials, these cases, are bogus. And they're getting away with it. And, he probably will be convicted of a felony.
Not only are they getting away with it, they're saying if Trump gets into office, he's going to target his political opponents as they're targeting their political opponent.
Oh, my God. If only he would. Tit for tat. I mean, this is the problem. They break the precedent. And so that kind of allows Republicans to break it, to follow through and mimic them. And I mean, I suppose it's a good thing that Republicans don't, but at some point, I mean, even Trump doesn't. Trump didn't prosecute Hillary Clinton or any of the other people that went after him. He was a pussycat. And so I just, I think there needs to be accountability and ruthlessness. You don't have to be an authoritarian, but by the same token, people who do wrong need to pay. They need to be punished. And that means people inside the bureaucracy who have been dishonest, who have corrupted the FBI and the CIA, you have to go in there and rip out the top layer, not just the boss. You've got to go down several layers of management, and you have to redo how you recruit people, and you have to do it on merit and try and restore these institutions. And, I hope that Trump can do it, but it seems a huge amount of baggage that he's going to have next year if he is the nominee. And I think it's moot. I mean, I think there's still an open question about whether he is the nominee. I know that's counterintuitive. I don't know what you think, but the polls, everyone seems to think it's an absolute lay down misere that he's ahead in the polls. But I cannot believe polls that put him 40, 50 points ahead and that he's supposedly winning some huge swathe of Black voters and young voters. I mean, we saw this in 2020 in polls in 2020, and they turned out to be bogus. So I don't know where those numbers are coming from or why they're turning out like that, but I don't really trust them. And I think that, the polls end up being a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I think, or I hear that on the ground, for instance, in Iowa, it's a different story. So maybe that's just gaslighting coming from the DeSantis team, but I don't think the race is over. And I think that, who would be the better candidate to win the general election needs to be what we're driven by. And, it really rankles to think that the bogus lawfare against Donald Trump should be a factor in that. But really, in reality, it will have to be. It has to be factored in because I can't see independents and moderates and, a lot of Republicans voting for Trump if he's a convicted felon or, God forbid, sitting in jail. And there's no way of getting out of it, unless he wins the election or a Republican wins the election and pardons him. That's the only way he gets out of it.
Well, I tell my students, one, there's going to be plenty to talk about over the course of the next year. There's no shortage of what's going to take place in this election. Two, anyone that tells you that they know how the election is going to play out and what's going to happen, they're lying to you. This election, you cannot predict on any level. It's the most unpredictable election we've ever seen. There are variables that have never been introduced before. And so I have no idea how it's going to play out. And I don't make a prediction in this election. Do I have preferences? Of course, I have preferences. Do I want to see someone that's going to come in and pull like a Millie just did in Argentina, where he just cuts the amount of federal agencies in half? Yeah, I would love to see that. And I think that sends a real message. But I can't predict where it's going to go from here. All I know is it will certainly be interesting, and we'll certainly have a lot to talk about. So, Miranda, I really appreciate you coming on, taking the time to speak to the audience.
Terrific. Great to talk to you, Nick.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.